Still an incredible eating and drinking establishment inside the Mirage, right here on the Las Vegas Strip. And this is Covers.com's Final Four betting roundtable. Really happy to be joined today. First off, I should introduce myself, Patrick Everson for Covers.com. Happy to be joined today by Covers experts Zack Cimini and Ted Savransky. Teddy covers. And we've also got a great guest with us, Doug Knutson, who is the winner of Covers' Ultimate Race Contest. And we got a lot to talk about. We got the Final Four coming up. It's Friday morning here in Vegas. Final Four tomorrow. We're going to hit on some games and get some thoughts from all three of our panelists here and basically have a good time. And even though it is just a little bit after 9, we've got refreshing adult beverages in front of us. So cheers to everybody. Cheers, Teddy.
Cheers.
Doug, semi-cheers. All right, so let's just jump right in on the games with the odds, the spreads and totals, where things are at. We'll start with the first game tomorrow, South Carolina, Gonzaga. Here at the Mirage, it's at 6.5 and 138.5. Obviously, a little bit of a differences around town. But Zach, what are your thoughts on this at this point?
Well, obviously South Carolina, double-digit seed. No one expected them to be there. Gonzaga, one of those one seeds that, through the test of time, hasn't got to this point. So people want to see what they have. They probably have the easiest path in NCAA tournament history for a one seed. So there's going to be a lot to see if Frank Martin's defense can hold up one more time to get to that championship game on Monday. And definitely, of course, the region difference here. They played on the East Coast, those South Carolina games, Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Now they have to come out west, which is obviously Gonzaga's territory.
No, absolutely. What do you see on this, Ted?
Well, I mean, when we talk about South Carolina, I don't think there's a team that's played better in the NCAA tournament than the South Carolina Gamecocks. And if you were just starting your power rating numbers from the beginning of the NCAA tournament, South Carolina would be the number one seed in the tournament. No one's played better than the Gamecocks. Now, when you look at their full season numbers, they don't reflect, certainly offensively, what we've seen from South Carolina in the first 2 weekends of the NCAA tournament. They played a lot more free-flowing basketball. Mm-hmm. The question is whether they're going to be able to do that against a Zags team that doesn't allow many opponents to play free-flowing basketball and has played some elite-level defense themselves, where the Zags have struggled in this tournament. I mean, look, we look at South Carolina, they got a big bandwagon going.
Yes.
You beat Duke, you beat Baylor, you beat Florida, all as underdogs in straight-up fashion and over a 3-game span, and people are going to pay attention. Whereas Gonzaga, the only game they covered in the first 2 weekends was the finale against Xavier, a Xavier team that ran out of gas, essentially,
exactly,
in that contest. So from a betting bandwagon perspective, there's a lot more support for South Carolina. But, there's always the but in these games. If you have a game that has only one side of an argument, you're not going to have it's going to be one-sided action, and the line's going to move against you. This is a game where they're definitely getting two-sided action.
Right.
And the wise guys see Gonzaga's full season numbers and say this team hasn't lived up to their potential in the postseason. They can play better, and South Carolina, it'd be difficult for them to play better than they already have.
There's still a little bit of a room to get to the ceiling for Gonzaga, whereas South Carolina may already be there.
Sure.
And how do you look at this, Doug, from your perspective?
This is the game that I like better than the other one. And like Teddy said, there's no team that's playing better. Yet leading up to the tournament, there's probably no team that's playing worse than South Carolina. They covered, one of the previous 9 games and won 3 straight up. So I think a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon. Gonzaga, number 1 seed. They did have a monkey on their back, as the coach is trying to deny, but they had a big one. They were the number 1 seed. They had a lot of negativity because of the conference that they're in, but they had to get to the Final Four, which they did. Their best game was the last game, and I think they did get the monkey on their back, and I think you're going to see a lot better Gonzaga team. The last team that was in the position, as Teddy covered, that won 3 games outright as an underdog was Xavier, when they won 3 games in a row as an underdog, and they got blown out the next game after that. So I think South Carolina is a lot in the same position as Xavier was, and again, they played Gonzaga too. So Gonzaga's playing the same team, which you just did with Xavier, winning those 3 upsets. South Carolina went home. I'm sure a lot of people told them how good they were. They scored a lot more points than their season average. So I think a lot of that's going to come down to earth. I noticed on the Covers matchup page, they have the checks off of who's better offense, defense, free throws, etc. Gonzaga had an X all the way down the column. You don't see that too often. I don't care how big of a mismatch is and matchups. You don't see one team that dominated in every single category, which Gonzaga has. So I really like Gonzaga in this game.
Ted, how do you feel? Do you think Doug clearly favors Gonzaga here? Do you think there's any edge to one team over the other here, or do you think the two-sided betting action reflects that this is this could be a really, really good matchup? Do you think there's any edge one side or the other, whether it's coaching or players?
I've got a big ticket on this game.
But not without revealing anything.
Well, yeah, I think there's a big edge in this game. Of the two games, and I'm with Doug that this is way the better of the two games to bet. So yes, I feel there's a significant edge in this ball. Of course, you can get that at Covers Experts.
Absolutely. And
right now.
Do you think there's some edge to be played here?
Well, from an X's and O's standpoint, obviously Gonzaga has this is a catered matchup for them. South Carolina, obviously, we talked about tempo. They got away with playing fast pace against Marquette in that comeback, fast pace against Duke when it comeback, and obviously Florida. They know them really well, so they're able to shut them down with the SEC style. So Gonzaga, we've seen them with the versatility all season long, even against U of A to start the season. They can play that back and forth basketball. They have size in the interior to get the ball inside, which South Carolina really, if people sometimes you can misconstrue great defense. I think they played a lot of guard-heavy teams that didn't have balance. So now they're going to be challenged on the interior. Once you pass that ball inside, kick it out, all of a sudden they're going to be running all over the place, and we'll see what Frank Martin can do.
I was talking with Jason Simmel, CG Technology, yesterday. One of the runs a few of the really good sports books here in town, and he mentioned they were seeing some money line bet on the dogs in this. I imagine that doesn't really surprise you guys. It's like you said, it's a very bandwagon team right now with South Carolina.
Well, I mean, this is a game where there is a clear divide between the public and the wise guys. The other game, not so much. There's a little bit of divide there, but this game is very clear. The public is riding the South Carolina bandwagon. The wise guys are looking at Gonzaga's season-long stats and resume and saying the Zags are the right side here. So it's a matter of current form versus season-long. And generally in those spots, I'm on the current form side. But this one, obviously, is it's a different animal when it comes to Final Four type of pressure.
All right, well, let's move along to that second game. We've got Oregon, North Carolina, 3 seed, 1 seed. You got here at the Mirage and MGM Resort Sportsbooks, you got Carolina running -4.5, total 151.5. And then I'll just run through all of it. Doug, I'll start with you. Same thing, just kind of talk to that matchup a little bit.
I'm a little biased on this game. I am from Portland, Oregon. Duck City up there. My son's favorite team, Ducks. He's got pictures with all the Duck players with Dana Altman. So bias is Oregon, yet they are coming off a huge upset win last week. At the same token, I don't know if I can lay points to North Carolina. They had that huge lead in the ACC tournament against Duke, gave all that up, jumped all over Arkansas, up by 20. Arkansas came all the way back, took the lead. We saw that last week. They jumped on who did they play last week?
They had Kentucky in the Elite
Kentucky had a jumped on a big lead, double-digit lead on Kentucky. Kentucky stormed all the way back and took the lead on them. So I don't know if I feel comfortable laying points with Carolina. At the same time, Ducks are coming off that huge win. So again, I'm a little more neutral on this game. I'm going to be rooting for the Ducks, but I can easily see Carolina winning this game. Oregon does have something to prove. Both Shea out. Everybody wrote them out when they lost their big kid, and they have a chip on their shoulder. Say, hey, we're a lot better than what people thought. My number one pick this year was last week against Kansas. Kansas had 3 perfect games in a row. Teams just don't go and walk right into the Final Four. You've got to have that 1 or 2 close games, which Kansas did not have. Oregon had 2 of them with Michigan and Rhode Island, so they snuck through. They're ready for a good game, and Dana told them, hey, we got lucky 2 games now. Let's try to put our A game. Everybody wrote them off against Kansas. I think Kansas went all the way to the favorite in the futures.
Yes.
So that was my number one play of the tournament, and Oregon awarded me. So another reason I like Oregon, but it's a tougher game.
All right, how about you, Teddy?
Well, yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a sharp square divide in this game. The public likes North Carolina, and the wise guys are definitely keeping the line from going above 5. And there was a lot of thought this line would go to 5.5, maybe even 6, and that hasn't happened. And if you look at the books around town, the sharper books are still at 4.5. The books that cater to public bettors are at 5 on this ball game. So it is a fairly clear dichotomy, even though it's not quite as sharp, where it's all the squares on South Carolina, all the sharps on Gonzaga. This one's not quite as divided as that, but there's definitely an element of wise guy support for the Ducks, and I can understand that. I mean, you say who's if you're going to make case for who's the most, and why do they call it the MOP instead of the MVP? It's like the NCAA. The NCAA just does stuff to be stupid and annoying, and my God, I hate that organization. I really do. Amateur athletics, make another billion off these guys' backs. But let's not get sidetracked on this. That's how
I understand.
Well, hey, we haven't even. I mean, last time we were drinking. Today we haven't even had a sip. It's earlier this time. So it's all caffeine as opposed to the alcohol starting to talk. But let's stay on point, Ted. Oregon, North Carolina. The Tar Heels are basically a one-trick pony. There's no team in the country that's been better on the offensive glass than North Carolina, and that's that's their entire key to success. Is I believe it's 42% for the season. They rebound 42% of their misses for the season. No other team's above 40%. They're way ahead, and all those second chance opportunities. You think of all the big guys down low, and they may not be NBA studs down the road, but they're really good college players.
Sure.
And their ability to get all of those extra possessions has served them well. And of course, Barry at the point has been very good here in the tournament. But Barry's got 2 bum ankles, and Oregon has the potential to spread this team out and create matchup problems defensively for North Carolina. So I wouldn't sell Dana Altman short. We talk about Dana Altman versus Roy Williams. Altman's at least -2 in that matchup. For whatever it's worth.
He's a great coach. He's been a great coach for a long, long time and just had success at several stops. Where do you land on this and kind of analyzing this game?
From a value standpoint, sometimes I like to look back at the prior spreads instead of diving into the game. So when you're looking at this 4.5-point spread as you're talking about, obviously North Carolina, last year they went to the championship, lost on that last-second 3-point heave by Chris from Villanova Wildcats. But North Carolina, they were 2-point favorite against Kentucky. Oregon, 7-point underdog against Kansas. Odds makers they can't make that line 2. They can't make that line 2.5 because of that Kentucky matchup. And obviously, they're going to move that down from that Kansas game. So that's where you get that 4.5. I could see that number going up by a half point, maybe. But from an X's and O's standpoint, you talk about balance. That's why these two teams are there. They have great balance. North Carolina improved defensively. So even though they had a little bit of rust in some of those tournament games, they were able to win because they improved defensively. But Oregon, they're a matchup killer with that balance. I think everybody underrated that, but everybody can score on that team. Double-digit scorers all over the place. Jordan Bell inside, Dylan Ennis at the perimeter, Tyler Dorsey, Dylan Brooks. They've got the freshman or sophomore point guard now, and Casey that can hit the 3. So there's tremendous balance on both sides of the floor. And you talk about coaching. Roy Williams is known to be not have the best of it when it comes down to these games. So we'll see what happens here.
Let me follow up on that. He hit each on this. Not much going on with the total in that first game. South Carolina Gonzaga. It's steady at some places, maybe a half-point move downward at others. But the Carolina Oregon game, that's definitely gone up. In some places, some of the offshores, it's gone up 2-3 points. It's up a point or so here in Vegas. What do you kind of mentioned the scoring and so forth. What do you see there?
Well, I know University of Phoenix Stadium is not a basketball arena, and sometimes people get misconstrued with that as well. We saw the game in Dallas, whatever it was, a couple of years ago. They transformed that. But scoring is going to happen regardless, so I don't really look into that. I think it's going to be a run-and-gun game just like the point spread suggests. And I'm not a totals guy, but with the balance on both sides of the team that I just talked about, I want to see why that can't go over.
Why it wouldn't go over?
Why it wouldn't go over. Yeah.
How about you? What do you think on that as far as the scoring?
Well, it's interesting because South Carolina Gonzaga, we're talking about the top 2 teams defensively in the country, number 1 and number 2. And yet I want no part of this under because, and the markets don't either, because they sense that neither team wants to get bogged in a half-court game. And that both the Gamecocks and the Zags are going to look to push tempo at every opportunity. So even though that's the top 2 defensive teams, literally 1 and 2 in the country in effective field goal percentage, we're not seeing the under there. For Oregon, North Carolina, as you mentioned, we've seen a bunch of over money.
Yes.
And that's sharp over money right from the get-go on this game. And I think that has more to do with matchups than any other factor. North Carolina's ability to pound the ball down low. This is a game that Oregon's going to miss Boucher. and the Ducks' ability to spread the Tar Heels out on the perimeter. And boy, they've executed their offense really well in this tournament. Even though the pace hasn't been there, the execution has been there. But when we're talking about an Oregon-North Carolina game with $152 now as the total, it's not like the pace of this game is going to be frenetic.
Right.
It's not an up and down, matchup. So I'm not sold on this game flying over the total, even though the markets have moved significantly in that direction early in the week.
You got any thoughts on that? I know you're not normally a
I'm
totals
not
guy.
a totals guy. I got my hands full with the sides, but totals I'm not so much. Like Teddy said, you got a number 1, number 2 defensive teams in the country. Everybody's talking about it. The line really hasn't moved in the reflection of that. So, again, if you're looking at a close game, it could easily go over that total with a low number. So, but again, I'm not a totals guy. I'll have something on the side, and I'll be rooting that in.
Gotcha.
And I wanted to just address something that Zack was talking about with the domes and shooting in the domes.
Right, we were going to get to that, so let's just move. Let's just move right into it. Let's move right into it. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, one of the things that you want to do, that was a great academic study where they looked at the games that were in the domes where the court was on the side, and they looked at the change in the dome and how the courts were moved to the middle of the court. And they viewed that in comparison to all the other games and all the other venues, and normalized for three-point shooting and normalized for three-point defense. And at the end of all of this stats, they had a decent sample size of 165 games of 330 teams playing in these big domes with the court in the center, like it is in Glendale. That was a change they started making in 2008. No, in 2007, and for the Sweet 16, and then in 2008 they put the court. Since 2008, they've been putting these courts in the center, and counting all of those games, the three-point shooting and the perimeter shooting has been better in the giant dome venues than it has for A, all other NCAA tournament games, and B, all games over the course of the regular season. So the domes have not negatively affected shooting. That's one of these myths. It's like the Monday Night Football home underdog. It was really good in the 90s, and the 80s, and people were still talking about it in 2014 like it meant something. The dome effect was real 15 years ago, absolutely. The sightlines have gotten better at this stage, in my opinion, and based on this academic study that I just read, is nothing but a myth.
So you don't think that any of the 4 teams is facing anything different from being, even if it's just a matter of experience in a venue like that? Like Gonzaga plays most of its games obviously in smaller venues in the West Coast Conference.
Yeah, but the Zags played at the Staples Center this year. They played at Madison Square Garden. I mean, it's not like the Zags don't play in big venues. For all of these teams, again, I mean, South Carolina hasn't been in a whole lot of games of this magnitude in recent years. That's the one team that I think may have some issues with playing in this type of venue because they just really haven't.
It's huge. It's not only the magnitude of the venue; it's the magnitude of the situation.
Sure. But again, the Gamecocks are a really good defensive team.
Right.
And the team, if you come out and you got jittery legs, if you're playing defense, you're down, 6-3 instead of 14-1, 14-3, and it makes a big difference in terms of your ability to bounce back from a little bit of a rough start.
All right. What do you see? You think the venue comes into play much here for any of the 4 teams involved this weekend?
Not at all. I think maybe the proximity. I know I've been to that stadium a few times, and you're used to those tournaments being played in these big cities, but you think about Glendale, Arizona, is really just farmland there in that one little area. So, I mean, maybe proximity. I'm not sure if they're staying right there at that hotel, but that'd be the only thing I would pop up there.
All right. Well, let's and you touched on this a little bit, Zach. So we'll start with you on this. The coaching experience. 3 of the 4 coaches are in the Final Four for the first time. Yeah. Roy Williams, the only one who's back, made it to the championship game last year, so they're probably chomping at the bit to make up for that, losing on the last second three-pointer, as you alluded to. But people, some people are, a lot of people are very skeptical of Roy Williams. What do you think? What do you make of coaching experience in this game?
Well, for me, I think Mark Few, Dana Altman, they're system coaches that just boosted their systems with better recruiting classes and utilizing the graduate transfers and transfer rules. Obviously, Gonzaga has a couple of prime transfers there with Nigel Williams-Goss, Oregon, Dylan Ennis from Villanova, 6th-year senior. So they've been there in these tournaments. They just haven't got this far, and I think they just utilize those rules to their benefit to get to this point. And then South Carolina, obviously, it's been a process with them. Frank Martin's touched on that. They recruited all those guys 4 or 5 years ago when he got there. They're mainly seniors, a couple juniors, so that's how they rode that theme there. And then Roy Williams, they've been there year in and year out.
Right.
They took advantage of some prime matchups and comebacks. You need comeback wins in the tournament to get to this point. So we'll see what they can do. But they're all great coaches. I think this is the time where you look at Mark Few. Maybe it's his time. Just utilize that system great out there in Gonzaga and on the West Coast. And those transfers have been paid off huge.
Mm-hmm. Do you see anything with do you look at coaching at all when you're looking at matchups like these?
Not a whole lot. No, Teddy made Dana -2 over Roy.
What do you make that number?
You're very conservative on that. Again, I'm a big Dana fan, but and you're also giving these coaches 6 days to prepare. It's like in football, you hear all the time about these blue chip coaches giving a week, 2 weeks to prepare for these football games. You're almost giving them a week to prepare here, and I would definitely favor Dana giving him a week against this Carolina team. With Roy, we all know they're like thoroughbreds, North Carolina. They'll run up and down the court. They played against Texas Southern, which is basically a good high school team. But that was the only good, impressive game they had in this tournament. After they get the big lead, stuff starts to tighten up. They go in the half-court offense. They stutter. They don't know what to do. I remember when Carolina had the lead against Kentucky, the guy was at the free throw line shooting 62% for the year. How's the guy in there shooting 60% and you need free throws? You don't need field goals. I mean, stuff like that's going through my mind. How's Roy having these players out there? He's got a deep bench. I mean, he's played 11 guys, I think, in the first half last time. A couple guys got in foul trouble. But giving Dana a week to prepare, giving him 5-6 points. Again, the only thing that scares is Oregon's coming off this huge win against Kansas during the Final Four. That's the only reason I'm not going all out on Oregon right now. But
all right, what do you see out of the coaching aspect of this?
Yeah, I probably rank them Altman 1, Frank Martin 2. I put Roy 3. I put Few last. If I'm ranking, in terms of getting guys to achieve and overachieve. And Martin might be right there. In terms of
they've definitely overachieved.
And they have. I mean, he's a bear to deal with.
Yeah.
But he is absolutely a winning basketball coach.
Right.
We saw that at Kansas State, and we've seen that obviously here at South Carolina. But it's interesting that you say, in my mind, the biggest advantage that coaches are going to have is in the short turnaround, is in the 48 hours, when between the Thursday and the Saturday game, or when there's not as much time to prepare, and the coaching edges tend to get mitigated somewhat during the week back home, or the 3 or 4 days back home, as these teams get ready for the next weekend. So, in my mind, the coaching issue is bigger for Monday night's game than it probably will be for any of these.
All right, let's move along to another aspect that's always part of these big weekends here, whether it's Super Bowl or really throughout the NCAA tournament.
Where to watch?
Well, sure, where to watch. There's a lot of great places to watch, no doubt, including obviously right here at the Still. This is going to be an excellent place to take in basketball over the next 2-3 days. But there are prop bet options. Do you look much at those? I talked to Doug earlier. He said he kind of lays off the prop bets. Do you look much at prop bet opportunities over this weekend?
I look at them. I don't get involved hand over fist on the props, but it's one of those things that you're looking around. It's one of I got all distracted before when I was ranting and railing about the NCAA. And I forgot my whole point was that of the two players, the two players who are right now at the top of the list for MOP in the tournament, it would be Sindarius Thornwell, obviously, who's been a monster for and Tyler Dorsey, who's been every bit as good for Oregon.
Yes.
For the Ducks to succeed in this game, and many times my prop bets that I'm going to make are going to augment my side bet. They're derivatives of my side bet. So if I think Oregon's going to hang, I'm going to be betting on Dorsey, I'm going to be betting on Dylan Brooks, I'm going to be betting on Jordan Bell, et cetera, et cetera. If I think that Oregon's going to have a tough time, I'll be betting against those guys. So in terms of a general strategy, I would recommend use the props as derivatives of your initial bet, and that allows you to get some diversification in there and allows you to maximize your advantage when you see a point spread edge that will translate to something on the board.
All right, how about you on you look much to props at all in these over the course of the tournament and over this weekend?
Yeah, I love the MOP. I hit a few years ago.
The MOP.
Yeah, a few years ago I hit pretty big on Tyus Jones, 25-1.
Nice.
And I think right now there is a great value out there on the big man from Gonzaga, Kevin Parnowski. You look at, you forecast forward. We talked about this when we did the college predictions earlier this year, or earlier this month. But the last 5 years, all point guards have won this. You talk about Kemba Walker, Peyton Siva, Shabazz Napier, Tyus Jones, last year Ryan Archie-Diacono. So obviously Nigel Williams-Goss plus 350s at the top of the board right now. Tyler Dorsey, Joel Berry, guys are all there, but Kevin Bernowski's down there. And you look forward, if he faces North Carolina or Oregon, this is where the Boucher factor comes in. I think we've been waiting. If Oregon gets there, this is where the Boucher factor comes in. They pound that ball in there. They have nobody that can guard him. And then North Carolina, if you look, they have a lot of bigs, but that's the problem there. They rotate four big guys inside, and Parnowski is going to be a challenge. If you're not playing these guys the maximum minutes, he's going to know what to do against all those guys. So I think that's the best value there. I'm not sure exactly what it's at. I think it's 14, 15 to 1 or something like that, but that'd be a value play.
It's certainly a little valuable. One thing they offer here at Mirage and MGM Resort Sportsbooks that a lot of people really have gotten into over the last couple of years, and certainly these last couple of weekends, they do this first to 15, which is, it's just a riot to see everybody blow up when the score is like 15-13 and they're 5 minutes into the game. Do either of you see anything there out of either of these four teams where that might be a kind of a fun play to jump on, not necessarily a value play per se, but just something fun to jump on?
I think Oregon could do. I mean, North Carolina is getting off to these slow starts, so Oregon definitely has confident scorers in Brooks and Dorsey, and it might take Roy Williams that first 8 minutes to adjust to that. So I could see that happening with Oregon.
And I'll probably look at this. Yeah, I worry about South Carolina getting off to a slow start. I think this venue may cause some struggles early on. So I guess I would lean towards Gonzaga. What's the juice on that? Is that a minus 110 or is that a minus 115 or a minus 120? It's a big
usually 30-cent line. That's one reason I stay away from props.
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's, I don't think it's a 110 thing, depending on
line.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd imagine they tend to be minus 115 either way. And again, your edge has to be greater to lay minus 115 and expect to show a profit than it is at minus 110. And a minus 110 maybe you find an edge. At minus 115 again over the long term. You might find some positive expectation opportunities, but you got to dig for them.
Well, let's move on to just kind of a quick look back over this year's tournament. They had, and I think Doug, you mentioned you're not much of an over/under guy, but you may want to speak to this as well. But you had an early spate that first weekend, just a boatload of overs. We had we're showing the over 31, 16, and 1. Is there something about that first weekend that just lends itself to that? Is there something about the new rules, that maybe the 30-second shot clock? Because in the second weekend, it kind of it cycled back the other way.
Law of averages, maybe. There's been a lot of unders in the tournaments previous to this year, and I think the odd makers kind of catch up. And before that, as you get into the old timers, you remember everything was going over, and then they over adjusted, and then the unders, new venues, and so forth. Especially the halftime. I mean, people are feasting on first half unders for a while. You don't get that anymore. So I think it's more of the law of averages. But again, I'm not a totals guy, but I can see how things start to even out after 3 or 4 years of one way or another.
What do you make on just this? Just speaking to this year's tournament, that the
Well,
huge
the
run
opening
of overs
round,
in the first two rounds.
It wasn't the first. It was literally the first round.
Yeah, most of it was the first round. Yeah, it was like 24-8
it was the Thursday night game. Remember, all the late games went over, and the books took a beating on that Thursday.
They had a really bad.
They had all
Thursday
these
night.
parlay liability and all of that, and then it just continued into Friday, and all the games on Friday just flew over the total. That's all it was. It was like a 24-hour window where all these games, it was just one of those. Or roll the dice. Oh wow, you got 3 5s. I mean, it was just random. I don't think there was anything systemic in the sense that the markets are way off on these overs or they're way off on these unders. Just happened to be one of those situations where a bunch of overs cashed, and that is going to reflect the numbers for the whole tournament. So next year, when people don't remember, they're going to go, "Oh wow, last year all the overs cashed."
Yeah, so I got to bet the over.
Right, exactly. And it has. I mean, and it's in terms of our ability to make money off this information moving forward, not much.
Negligible, if at all. Do you think it matters much for? And I'll throw this at you, Zach, with the Final Four. The last 2 years, we've gone down to the 30-second shot clock now. The last 2 years in the Final Four, over 3-0 last year, 2-1 the year before that. Kind of regressed to the mean prior to that. Do you think this is a trend, or do you think, as Teddy said, it's just one of those things where it's gonna bounce back and forth? There's no real knowledge you can apply to the next game or the next Final Four?
Yeah, from a total standpoint, I'm not a big totals guy, but I didn't on the first round scenario. I think seeding had a lot to do with it. Seeding, there was a lot of missed seeding, so and then devaluing conferences like the SEC that made big runs and they were able to score. But as far as the Final Four, it's a small sample size for me to say that. Obviously, there's been the ACC and Pac-12's been there, so they're more of a run and gun type style. So, and last year with Villanova, they overachieved offensively as well. So, you got to kind of look at it and see. Obviously, I'm kind of rambling on this one, but if I was looking at it like that, the Big East last year, Villanova, they made a run with offense versus the defense that got them there. You could say the same thing with North Carolina in prior years, but this year I think it's more steady, so the lines are going to be more accurate, especially with these 4 teams that are there.
Okay, let's go, Doug. Let's go to you for a minute. Talk a little bit about this ultimate race victory that you got in one of @Cover's many great comments. Yeah, bravo, well done. Doug pocketed $5,000 for that victory. Talk a little bit about how what your strategy was for that and how that obviously worked out well for you.
7,500 people signed up for this thing. That's
That's a lot of people.
That's the thing that had
Well done, man. Doesn't
had to
surprise
get
me.
over the most. This how lucky I was. I mean, but the number one strategy is you don't give half points for ties. People keep picking ties. I don't know anything about hockey, but I know there's a lot of 5s out there. People are seeing 5s at minus 60, minus 70 on the over, and they're picking these 5 overs. Well, if they realize if they're picking the over, ties like a loss, you're basically betting an under 5.5 is what they're essentially doing, and now the under's a favorite. Now
Right.
if they put a 5.5, it's going to be minus 30 or 40, and people don't see that. And I noticed a lot of the people had 10, 15, some had 20 ties. That's insane. I had 0 ties to the 4-month contest, and that's what really separated me from a lot of the competitors in there. I don't mind sharing that because I'll probably never come in running again, so I'm not going to give away all the secret. So I don't mind giving away that secret, but it's staying away from the whole numbers. Every whole number you pick, you're giving up a half a point of juice, and you're not getting value at all in those whole numbers. So again, I had 0 ties, and that was probably my number one strategy. As far as my handicapping, the way I handicap, NBA really falls into the handicapping strategy that I look at, and the NBA really carried me. I think I was like 20, 25 games above 500 in the NBA. I had a great bowl game, so I had a good college run to finish that off. I started out real bad in college, but then I caught on fire. I think I finished 10, 15 games with college too, but the NBA carried me, and staying away from the ties basically is my number one strategy in that contest.
No, understood. Was any of that? Were you able to carry any of that into how you've handled the NCAA tournament?
The postseason tournaments is a handicap a little different because I look at cycles, how teams play. Teams are constantly changing. The way teams play now, the way they are playing different than they were 4 or 5 weeks ago, the way they were playing 2 or 3 years ago, so forth. In the postseason, I look at more of a game by game. Teams, except for Kansas in the first 3 games, every team's going to play different than they did the previous game, and I just gotta decide which way it's going to go up or down. And so I handicapped the postseason a little different than the NBA. The NBA was obviously a longer stretch, and there's a little bigger cycles the way teams are playing in the regular season.
All right, you had some.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's the entry fee on that contest?
What did I have? I think I had to borrow something from you, didn't I? No, it's a free contest. And
Oh, so you won $5,000 for free?
for free, yeah.
Nice.
That's,
and you can sign up where?
You can sign up at covers.com. Great website, lots of a whole bunch of free content, and obviously free contests too. I mean, it cost Doug nothing to jump in, and he put his knowledge to good use and walked away with $5,000.
Another big strategy is you got to go on every day. You miss 1 or 2 days, you're out of the contest. So that's another big strategy. You have to go on there every day.
Yeah,
so,
got to make a commitment there.
You got right.
Whatever. This is what we do.
Absolutely.
This is what we do.
So
every
it's
day.
easier for me
And I'm
since
sure it's
I'm
what
in this
you-
grind every day anyway.
Yeah, what you guys out there in viewer land are doing every day too, obviously.
Well, let's wrap this up with a little bit of March Madness moments. I mean, I'm sure with your guys' involvement in sports betting for as long as you have been, I'm sure you've got a bad beat you can recall, a memorable win.
Don't
maybe
start
it's
me
from
first.
maybe it's from. Don't go to you first. Okay, I'm gonna go to Teddy last.
Might have the
Maybe
same
it's from this
game.
year. Maybe it's from previous years. Doug, let's start with you. It sounds like you've got some interesting goods.
I may
there.
need a beer after rehashing this one, but
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're just making us cry. You know?
Vegas time just went up 3 hours. No. first, the good one I remember this year. We all heard about the Michigan plane crash, how they carried on as an 8 seed in the Big Ten, and they went through. And I was looking at them as a real big fade. And everybody's asking me, who do you like in the first round? Who do you like in the first round? It was Oklahoma State. I was telling everybody, Oklahoma State. Offensive, professionally, one of the top teams in the country. So Oklahoma State was my opening round game of the year. And I don't know if you guys remember how that finished.
Yes.
It was a seesaw game the whole game. I don't
Yes.
think anybody had more than a 3 or 4 point game. I got the +2, 2.5, whatever it was, and Oklahoma State throws up a 30, 35 footer at the buzzer
Yes.
to lose by 1. But that was very memorable. I think it was the first game of the opening round, so it really got me off to a good start.
It was the first game of the Friday.
I would have had to play major catch-up if that ball didn't go, and that's not a good situation to be in. So I do remember that game.
And it was just this year. All right, you want to go last. So
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of it. I mean, there's just so many. It's what's hard. It's like, I'm like, which one is the one that
I
stands
do have
out?
a bad beat, though. You said you wanted one of each.
Bring it.
And this is the one that 2 years ago, everybody bets Duke. Year after year, they're overinflated every year. They played Utah. I don't know if you guys rehashed this. Probably about 2 years ago. Utah was down 5. I got a great number, 5.5. I think consensus is about 5 of that game. Utah came down, threw up the last shot, supposedly, of the game. They missed. Duke got the rebound, running out the clock. The camera goes right to the head coaches, shaking hands, players coming out. They say, wait a minute, we think we had a foul. And they show the replay. Guy was half-heartedly swiping at the ball. Guy comes up, less than a second. I think it's 0.6, 0.7 seconds left. Duke comes up, makes one of the 2 free throws, wins by 6, and I'll never forget that.
That's a rough one. All right, go to Zach while Ted ponders this a little bit more, or maybe stews on it a little bit more.
I actually was going to discuss that one, but I've got another one on a good win because I was on that Duke against Utah. But this was 3 years ago, first round matchup. St. Joseph's against UConn. UConn was 5.5-point favorites. St. Joseph's was killing them the whole game. They came back. I mean, Amita Brahim was at the free throw line in the final minute to force overtime, and then they covered in overtime. I mean, essentially, so they covered that 5.5 points.
And they went on to go win the title.
Yeah, they won the title.
I was
that
like,
year.
UConn's going out in the first round.
Yeah.
And they won the title off of that
They
game.
won the title.
And you got to win those close games going forward.
There's always the good and the bad. So the bad would be was the last man. I always do the last man standing contest. This was 3 years ago. I'm in the final. I think 90 people left. It's the Elite 8 round. I picked Tennessee. I think it was 2.5 point spread or something like that against Michigan. And it was if you remember that game, a complete meltdown on the last 5 minutes. They had a big lead, all of that, and then obviously Michigan barely covered that. It was horrible, but yeah.
All right, let's go to Teddy and see what you can recall. Whether it's this year, previous years, whatever you're willing to reveal.
Well, let's see. I had Memphis, the game that Derrick Rose missed the free throws. And Kansas won their national title. That was a lot of fun. But the one that stands out to me from recent years, and it was one of those deals. Okay, so the ESPN guys were in town. I was trying to look cool for like Ben Fox and Dave Tooley or whatever buddies of mine. And I was at the time I was writing for ESPN Insider, and I wasn't having a real good tournament. And I loaded up. I had Oregon plus the points against Wisconsin, and it was an Elite 8 matchup. And we were watching at one of the sports books here in town. All the guys together.
Yeah.
And Oregon's winning the whole game, right there, back and forth. They're in it. In the last 30 seconds, they fall apart, foul, miss, and Wisconsin ends up winning by 8, and I just melted down. I'm not going to swear, but yeah.
Right.
So I'm trying to look all cool. And you know what? Next year I didn't work at ESPN anymore. So that's one that certainly stands out to me.
All right.
Though I had Oklahoma State plus the points in the first round
That was
as
a nice
well.
start
And that
to
was
the tournament.
Juwan Evans hit shots like that for me all year. That guy made me a ton of money. Wasn't a wrong side. The wrong sides are the one that stand out, but it's certainly nice to cash.
You got to give props to Michigan though, the way they carried from the Big Ten tournament.
Yes.
And they came right on, and they gave Oregon. They lost by points to Oregon. I give a lot of credit to Michigan this year.
They had a really.
Bailenko. I'm a Michigan alumni.
Okay.
I went to school in Ann Arbor. Spent the better part of 7 years in that town. And yet I have no hesitation betting against Michigan when the opportunity presents itself, like we did in Oklahoma State. I bet against them when they're playing Louisville the national title and cash ticket there. So I kind of like cashing tickets against my alma mater. I feel like they still owe me for a bad financial aid package.
They know when you get to your senior year,
You have no options.
You're going to finish. You're going to figure it out.
They left me with $4 grand of quote unmet need.
Yeah, well,
so sitting there collecting soda cans.
Yeah, University of Colorado had a strange way of doing that too, so I share your pain there. Hey, listen, if you're checking us out right now on our cover on covers.com through the feed, better still if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube promo right now. Go to Covers YouTube channel, subscribe. We're giving away a bunch of Covers gear, prize packages, and we'll also have some promotional packages for Covers experts that you can win. You could earn a share of $1,000 in promotional packages from the Covers experts. Get a chance to help you in your picks a little bit. And that pretty much wraps it up for us here today at the Still, here inside the Mirage with our Final Four betting roundtable. My thanks again to the Covers experts, Zack Cimini, Ted Sorensky, Teddy Covers, and of course Doug Knutson, our winner of the Covers Ultimate Race Contest. Really appreciate all you guys being in here. And we appreciate all of you out there spending a little time with us today. Good luck with your Final Four picks. Enjoy it. It's going to be a couple of great games tomorrow, and obviously it'll be followed up by what we're sure will be an outstanding game on Monday night. For Covers.com, I'm Patrick Everson. Again, be sure to follow us or check out our YouTube channel and subscribe for those great prize packs. And of course, give us a follow on Twitter @Covers.